Good day, everyone. Today, we will be discussing the essential nutrients, particularly focusing on the proteins and amino acids. And in this discussion, there will be a series of subtopics in this discussion. Basically, we will deal on the essential food nutrients, which involves the proteins and amino acids, the lipids and fatty acids, as well as the carbohydrates, the energy, and vitamins and minerals as well. So in each of these topics, there are basically specific objectives that we have to accomplish. Uh, Generally, we will be focusing on their classification or types, the chemical structures, and also we will be discussing the general functions, as well as how is this important in the nutrition of aquatic animals. So basically, um, why we will deal or we will answer the questions on why do we have to integrate these essential nutrients in the practical diet of our organisms. Now, as mentioned, there are specific objectives in each topic. Now, since we are focusing here the proteins and amino acids, here in this subchapter, we will be focusing in the objectives on discussing the 10 essential amino acids required by the fish and their chemical structures, as of course. And secondly, we will distinguish between essential and non-essential amino acids. You will find that in a later slide. And next is how is the amino acids? What's the fate of the absorbed amino acids in fish? And also, we will be discussing the effects of deficiencies and excesses of amino acids in fish diets because we could not ascertain that if there is already amino acid, it is already sufficient, no? Because there will be a tendency that it will have a deficiency when, or it will have, or it will encounter a problem when your fish is being given with excess or deficient amino acids. And also, we will discuss the procedure on how to determine the qualitative and quantitative amino acid requirements of different kinds of aquaculture commodities. And also, we will be discussing or identifying different methods of evaluating the protein quality and how to determine the protein requirements of some aquaculture species, especially those commercially being cultivated in the Philippines, right? So those are our objectives in this subtopic. And please also note that in our Google Classroom, if you might have noticed the Google Classroom that or the task that I have posted in the Google Classroom, we have here after this chapter, you are all required to um, have a pre-recorded reporting. No? So in the pre-recorded reporting, you are expected to produce recorded video of yourself reporting your specific topics that is assigned to you. And of course, you will also be required to submit the PowerPoint presentation that you have made for your presentation. So, with that, let's start our discussion in this topic. So, again, a fair reminder to everyone to please submit a pre recorded presentation of your assigned topic, especially on the lipids and fatty acids, the carbohydrates and energy, the minerals and vitamins, right? Now, let's first, we could not proceed to our later discussions if we do not basically define or identify the proteins. What are these proteins, by the way? So proteins are basically macromolecules made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and may contain sulfur. So basically, when we say macromolecule, these are basically large molecules from the word macro, right? So it is composed in the chemical context, in the chemistry context, it contains carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and may contain sulfur. So if you might have noticed, if you're familiar with lipid bilayer is basically the components of cell membrane. No, if you have see there are phospholipids. There are lipids, by the way, and basically in there we we could say there are large molecules, and we call them as proteins. So the large molecules are basically composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes they contain sulfur. So if you take a look at the general chemical formula or structural formula of that protein is this one: the amino group plus the side chain group, and one bond is linked to the hydrogen and the other is linked to the carboxyl group, right? So this is basically the general formula for the proteins. And then um, the nitrogen content of um, right, the nitrogen content of the protein distinguishes it from fats and carbohydrates and other compounds. So basically, ang difference between fats and carbohydrates between proteins is that the nitrogen content. No, because if does not have a nitrogen, it could either be carbohydrates or fatty acids, right? So remember that. And then proteins occur in a living cell as compounds of tissues and organs and are major components of fish tissues. That's the reason why organisms basically need proteins to repair tissues that are already damaged and to operate the metabolic functions of the cell. So when the fish is basically less responsive or retarded growth, basically it does have a deficient supply of proteins, right? Now, the next item here is that there are needed, or the proteins are basically needed for growth and tissue repair, as well as tissue maintenance. So we all know for a fact that when you intake protein, you grow muscles, you grow taller or so ever. So basically, proteins are needed for growth as well as tissue repair. Tissue repairs, especially those areas that are damaged, wounded, mga wounds, those are repaired by the proteins, no? And also for maintenance. Okay, so those are basically three primary functions of the proteins. And then no other nutrient can take place of protein and its major role of building and repairing worn out cells and tissues. There is no other nutrient that could replace. It cannot be replaced by lipids. It cannot be replaced by carbohydrates or any other nutrients that are essential to fish. It is only protein. And in addition, proteins are also responsible for muscle contraction and are components of enzyme, hormones, and antibodies. So basically, um, when we say components of enzymes, hormones, and antibodies, they are basically the primary function or the primary factors in order for these enzymes and hormones to activate in our in the body of a certain organism. So they are responsible as well for the muscle contraction. And apart from that, proteins may also be complexed with heme, carbohydrate, lipid, and nucleic acids. It depends upon the type of proteins. There are very complicated proteins that basically comes with different carboxyl groups, no? Iba-ibang mga groups. So basically, iba-ibang mga side chains, rather, mga side chain nila. It could be either side chain of lipid, side chain of nucleic acid, or any other. All right. So the next one is basically we have mentioned earlier what will be the effect if the fish will have a deficient um, dietary proteins or excess dietary proteins or amino acids. So what will be the effect to that in that organism or in the certain aquatic organism? Aquatic animals must consume proteins to provide a continuous supply necessary for replacing worn out tissues. So basically, as mentioned earlier, it is needed for the maintenance of the organism as well as for the synthesis of new tissues, growth, and reproduction. So, if you have time, you could search videos in the YouTube about central dogma. You could also search about protein synthesis. So there, you could basically discover that amino acids are formed or proteins are basically formed through the aggregation of different amino acids. So again, the central dogma and protein synthesis will answer on how is this protein basically supports, or how is this amino acids basically is the serve as the building blocks of proteins. And then here we have the inadequate dietary protein will result in retardation. So these are basically highlighted because these are the effects when a fish has inadequate supply of dietary protein. So retardation meaning to say retarded growth or cessation of growth or a loss of weight due to the withdrawal of protein from less vital tissues in order to maintain the functions of more vital ones. So same as the humans, no? Kapag ang tao nagkasakit, kahit kumakain siya or kapag ang tao nagkasakit and then there is no enough intake of food that could replace those nutrients that repair, maintain the metabolic functions of those organs, basically, ang mangyayari is, bababa yung timbang or liliit yung tao na yun. So, same goes with the aquatic organisms. If there are basically inadequate supply of dietary proteins, it will directly result to retardation, cessation of growth, or loss of weight because the proteins that is supposed to convert the growth, the maintenance, and so on and so forth is lacking, no? So they have to get proteins from the other vital tissues in order to maintain the metabolic functions of a certain organism. So those are the effects of the deficiencies and excesses of amino acids in fishes. Now, here, as we have been mentioning that amino acids are basically the building blocks, no? Building blocks natin yang amino acids sa proteins. So proteins can be broken down or hydrolyzed into a number of basic units called amino acids. So when we say broken down or hydrolyzed, it basically mean that proteins can be simplified or proteins can be degraded into simple basic units called the amino acids. Now, what are these amino acids? Amino acids, as we have been mentioning, amino acids are called building blocks of proteins. So when we say building blocks, you could not create a house without blocks, no? Like for example, in the case of building a house, building, say for example, you could not create a wall if there are no hollow blocks. So in this case, the amino acids are the hollow blocks of proteins, the building blocks of proteins. So you pile a variety of amino acids, you fuse different types of amino acids, and then you create the so-called protein. You could get to know more about the protein synthesis when you will read videos about central dogma and protein synthesis. So if you take a look at the amino acids or the chemical structure of amino acid, this is the basic component of the amino acid. No, so I mean the protein rather. So this one is the amino group. This is basically the principal carbon. The principal carbon, one bond is bonded to the hydrogen, one bond to the amino group, one side chain group, and the other will be bonded to the carboxyl group. So this is the primary structure of a protein. In a protein molecules, amino acids form peptide bonds within amino acid and carboxyl groups, and a long strand peptide chain. Sometimes there are more than 20 or um, 20 naturally occurring 20 amino acids. No, there are 20 naturally occurring amino acids. There are also 20 amino acids specified in genetic code of human life. So identified amino acids only are 20. And later on, we will discuss or we will identify which amino acids are essential, which amino acids are not essentials. right? So those are the all about amino acids and more about amino acids. So here, the components of the general structure of an amino acid are, as mentioned earlier, a carboxyl group and the amino group, which represented by the NH2 on the alpha carbon, and the alkyl R group attached to the alpha carbon atom. So the carbon that is attached with the carboxyl group, the amino group, and the R alkyl group is called as the alpha carbon. So basically, sometimes the R contains different um, alkyl carbons, no? It could be either CH3, CH2, CH2, CH2. It could either be CH3, CH2, or a series of carbon atoms. I mean, alkyl groups. The R group gives the amino acids its individual chemical characteristics. So basically, itong R basically define a certain chemical characteristic of an amino acid. The formation of a peptide bond and amide linkages involves covalent bonding on the amino group and one amino acid and the carboxyl group adjoining the amino acid. When we say covalent, meaning to say it is being shared, or it is being shared. The bonding between the electrons of a certain element is shared to the other element. So basically, there is a covalent bond between the two elements and then creates a series of amino group that basically distinguishes a characteristic for a specific amino acid. Proteins may consist of one or more peptide chains held together in a protein molecule. So, as mentioned, one or more polypeptide chain. So here we have the essential amino acids, the 10 essential amino acids. So first is the arginine, followed by histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. So there might be some cases that you will be asked with by your professor, what are the essential amino acids? Now, in my case, I just have to memorize the initials, no? Para madali ko silang matandaan, I just have to memorize the phrase ahil MPTTV. Ahil meaning to say a hill MPTTV. A meaning to stands for the arginine, H stands for the histidine, I stands for the isoleucine, and L is stands for the leucine. Another L stands for lysine, and M stands for methionine. The P stands for phenylalanine, threonine for T, tryptophan for another T, and V for valine. So basically, um, ahyl impetitive stands for the essential amino acids. So I hope you get that in order for you to have this simple, no? Para madaling tandaan. And then the essential amino acids are the composed of amino acids like alanine, asparagine, aspartic acid, cysteine, glutamic acid, glutamine, glycine, proline, serine, tyrosine, and yeah, that's more um that's basically the essential and non-essential amino acids. So the most important here, because as we define or as we distinguish the essential and non-essential, please take note that when you say essential, it is basically it basically simply mean that it is needed by the organism to be taken up, no? Parang kailangan siya intake kasi the body could not synthesize that particular amino acid or that particular nutrient. Now, when we say non-essential, it is not necessarily be taken up by the organism because the body itself, the body of the organism itself could process or could synthesize these amino acids or nutrients. So the most important amino acids here are basically the um, the a hill in PTTV, right? So please uh, take some time to familiarize those essential amino acids. And then, if we take a look at the chemical structures of these essential amino acids, basically, ito yung mga essential amino acids, no? Arginine, methionine, arginine, histidine, isoleucine, methionine, phenylalanine, lysine, leucine, thrio- threonine, tryptophan, and valine. So, as mentioned earlier, the alpha carbon is attached to the alkyl group, and then also another bond to the carboxyl group, another bond to the amino group, and another bond to the hydrogen atom. No, so basically, this is the principal chemical structure or the general chemical formula for a certain amino acid. Now, it basically gives a characteristic when there will be a variations between the R group or what we call as the alkyl group. So, tinawag to siyang arginine kasi itong group na to basically linked to the arginine or somehow called to the arginine, and then when they will have a pentene group, it is called as histidine. No, there are uh I think this is six carbons, no, all in all, one, two, three, four, five, five carbons. So six, ito yung pang six niya. So basically histidine to siya. And then as I've mentioned, no, the characteristic of a certain amino acid is basically defined by the alkyl group. Itong mga series of alkyl carbons. Okay? And then classifications of amino acids. Now, what are the different classifications of amino acids? Amino acids are classified as essential or indispensable, non-essential or dispensable. So we have distinguished this just a while, no? Essential means to say that indispensable. It could not be synthesized by the body of a certain organism. Whereas the non-essential are dispensable, meaning to say it does not it is not necessarily be taken up by the organism because the body itself of the organism could synthesize them. Okay, so that's basically the very primary difference between the essential and non-essential. Now, essential or indispensable amino acids cannot be made or synthesized by the animal, or which is synthesized by in amounts not enough to support the maximum growth and haven't to be present in the diet, no? It has to be in the diet in order to for the organism to support the maximum growth and reproduction and some other metabolic processes that the organisms may need it, no, yung mga essential amino acids na yun. So more or less that is the explanation in this slide. And then the chemical classifications pa ng mga amino acids, no, ano yung mga chemical classification kanina. Ang classification is the general classification of amino acid. Ngayon, what are the chemical classification of these amino acids? Yeah, okay. What are the chemical classification of organic acids? I mean amino acids. So we have what we call as the three classifications of or the three chemical classifications of amino acids. First is the aliphatic amino acids. Next are the aromatic amino acids and the heterocyclic amino acids. Now let's first take a look at the aliphatic amino acids. Aliphatic amino acids are basically nonpolar and hydrophobic. When we say nonpolar or hydrophobic, it basically mean that they are not um, very loving, or from the word hydro means water, phobic means phobia, meaning to say they are water afraid. They are not uh, soluble with the water. They are not when they are combined with the water, they are basically form a heterogeneous mixture, no? Itong mga aliphatic hydrocarbons. Whereas itong mga aromatic hydrocarbons are amino acids absorb ultraviolet violet light that a wavelength above 250 nanomicrons and produce fluorescence. So ito yung mga amino acids that basically absorb the ultraviolet light wavelength. And ito namang heterocyclic are basically amino acids that has one ring, no? Yung nakita natin kanina mga chemical formula, may mga ring structure in which one atom is attached um, to the alpha carbon. So ito yun siya. So itong mga heterocyclic are basically called as the heterocyclic amino acids. Yung may mga bilog, no? Itong mga benzene rings na yan. So kapag may mga benzene rings, they are classified as heterocyclic amino acids. And there are essential amino acids like histidine, tryptophan, and proline are basically classified as heterocyclic amino acids, whereas aromatic are basically phenylalanine and tyrosine. Aromatic meaning to say these are uh, aromatic carbons, no? Parang may characteristics sila of an aromatic carbons. And then itong aliphatic amino acids are sub-classified further into basic, acidic, and neutral. Like for example, the basic are the arginine and lysine. Acidic are aspartic acid and glutamic acid. So it basically signifies an acidic compound when it has an acid in the second term of it, or the second part of its name. Neutral are leucine, isoleucine, valine, alanine, glycine, methionine, cytine, threonine, and serine. Those are the neutral aliphatic amino acids. So there you have it, the chemical classifications of amino acids. Now, in the essential amino acids, there are again, as shown earlier, there are 10. And aside from being the building blocks of protein, some of the amino acids serve as the precursors of or supply part of the structures and other substances. As mentioned earlier, no, they serve as the primary variables in order for those hormones and enzymes to function their specific functions in our body. And then methionine is the precursor of cysteine and cysteine and cysteine. Methionine also supplies methyl groups for the creation for creatine and choline and many other substances. So basically, when we say precursor, it it simply means that other carbons could not be formed if they are absent or if they are not around, no? When a carboxyl or OH group is added to the phenylalanine tyrosine is formed. And please also note that do not be very alarmed when you encounter several chemical names, no? Kasi kadalasan siguro sa atin na-overwhelm, no? Kapag naka-encounter ng mga hydroxyl group, mga methane, mga CH3, ano pa yung mga CaOH. So kasi mostly sa atin nakaka-encounter ng mga ganyan na terms, we tend to panic and do not even um, take a look at what are basically the nakikita agad natin na ano bang silbi nito sa pagiging fisheries, no? If you are or if you are planning to pursue graduate studies, it is very advisable, or it is very recommended for you to understand the chemistry of the the essential nutrients and some other nutrients that are necessary for the growth and for the benefit of any aquatic organism, no? Later on, you will have to deal on this one. All right, so uh, going back, tyrosine is needed for to form hormones like thyroxine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and melanin pigments. So basically, this basically discusses the primary essential nutrients that supports or that serve as a precursor to any other substances. No? And some other chemical reactions, when you remove the COOH or the carboxyl group from histidine, it forms a histamine. Okay, so you could take a look at a very complicated chemical equations of this one if you deal with organic chemistry. Tryptophan is precursor of serotonin and the vitamin and the vitamin nicotinic acid. And all finfishes have requirement of the same 10 essential amino acids. No? Lahat ng mga finfishes, lahat yun sila has a requirement of those ahil in PTTB. Okay? And then the non-essential amino acids. The non-essential amino acids for fish are, as mentioned earlier in the table, and these amino acids have nutritional significance because their presence in the diet conserves energy that is required for protein synthesis. No? Ito yung ginagamit ng organism to synthesize the protein, to create a protein. No? So, kailangan din to sila, especially in cases where fish have to grow, fish have to to repair some damaged tissues and so on and so forth. Some dispensable amino acids can partially be replaced or spare indispensable amino acids. No, if there are or if there is a deficiency of the essential amino acids, it could be sometimes be replaced by non-essential amino acids. No, some dispensable amino acids can partially be replaced. Sometimes partially, no, not totally. Phenylalanine can be partially replaced by tyrosine and methionine by cysteine. So those are specific replication or replacement of essential amino acids by tyrosine. Itong methionine pwedeng palitan ng tyrosine. I mean, phenylalanine can be palitan ng tyrosine and methionine can be palitan ng cysteine. Thus, requirements for phenylalanine and methionine decrease when the tyrosine and cysteine, respectively, is present or are present in the diet. Okay, so there you have it. And then here we have um, the classifications of proteins. No, proteins are broadly classified according to their form, solubility, and physical properties. No, and may tinatawag tayo ng mga globular proteins, fibrous proteins. No, mga globular proteins have a compact spherical or globular shape. If you take a look at yung pinapanood ko sa inyo kanina ng mga protein synthesis, you could see there that there are proteins that basically forms a spherical shape. There are proteins that forms fibrous proteins and other types of proteins when it comes to their physical characteristics. Now, we will not deal more of this as long as you know what are their functions and how is this related to the formation of different enzymes and hormones and where are these types of proteins are found. No, like for example, globular proteins are composed of or basically sometimes present in the enzymes or as an enzyme, protein hormones, protein and serum function, and the blood and antibodies. And for the fibrous proteins, they include collagen found in their cartilaginous soft bones, blood vessels, bone matrix, tendons, fins, and skin, elastins, and that are component of arteries and ligaments, keratins, and protective coverings. So fibrous yun siya na mga proteins. Okay, so those are the two classifications of proteins. And then another classification of proteins based on the physical properties are this. Itong tatlo na to. Simple proteins, ito yung mga proteins that yields amino acids as a chief or only products of a complete hydrolysis. No, itong yung very basic form of protein. No, nag-yield siya ng amino acid as a chief and only products of a complete hydrolysis. Earlier, we discussed or we said that kapag ang protein nag-hydrolyze, it forms a simple amino acid groups. Ito yun siya, yung mga simple proteins. When we deal with conjugated proteins, these are no longer simple. It is a complex protein such as hemoglobin, consisting of amino acids combined with the other substances. Now, may iba na siyang mga substances. Functions in interaction with the other chemical groups attached to the covalent bond or weak interactions. Yan siya yung tinatawag na mga conjugated proteins. Ito namang derived proteins are basically, from the word derived, it means to say that derivatives of proteins. These proteins are obtained from a single or conjugated proteins as a result of partial hydrolysis by the action of acids or enzymes or alkalis. No? So if you hydrolyze um, proteins, no? It forms from a simple protein or conjugated protein or complex protein. It forms a derived proteins. Ito yun sila na mga type of proteins. Sometimes the hydrolysis is caused by acids or enzymes or alkalines or alkalis. Okay? And then ito yung these are basically self-explanatory, you know. Mga simple proteins are yield of amino acids that are or derivatives when they hydrolyze, no? Sometimes they include albumins, no? Ito yung siya, albuminoids, globulins, histones, protamines. And where can you find these elements? In these materials or in this parts or ingredients. And then some groups are differentiated by the solubility in various solvents such as water, salt solution, alcohols, and other substances. No, they can be subclassified further when they have different characteristics when it comes to solubility. No, so more or less, this is the primary classification of a simple proteins. And then the conjugated proteins. Now, so the conjugated proteins, as mentioned earlier, are complex amino acid as a result of a hydrolysis. No, they are classified into many, four or five rather. Nucleoproteins, glycoproteins, phosphoproteins, hemoglobins, lysoproteins. So these are the five classifications of the conjugated proteins. Now, if you take a look at what do you mean by those proteins? Ito yun silang mga definition. Kindly read and familiarize. And then the right proteins are again taken from as a result of hydrolysis from a simple or conjugated proteins as a result of a hydrolysis caused by the action of heat, enzymes, or chemical agents. No, there are divided into primary and secondary protein derivatives. Primary proteins derivatives are those that have slightly been modified by the incipient action of the water, very dilute acids or enzymes. No? Ito yung kunti lang yung changes nila. Ito yung mga primary proteins. Or byproduct soluble weak acids and alkalis are formed. Now, when we take a look at the protein structures, yung kanina natin na mga discussions on the chemical or general classification of a protein, the composition, the organization, and the shape of a protein are directly related to their function. Kung para saan yun siya na protein, it could be either for a repair na protein, iba yung structure niya. If it is for growth na protein, iba yung structure niya. So basically, the function of the protein basically defines the shape, the composition, and the organization of the amino acids. Because of the complicated structure of the proteins, a new technology has developed as an aid in describing the structural organization of protein molecule. No, there are advances now that basically easily um, identify a type of protein. No? Hindi na kailangan ng mga complicated processes or test or experimental testing to identify the chemical um, protein structures. No? So they are classified into primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structures. Now, if we take a look at the primary structure of the protein, ito yun siya, no? As mentioned earlier, carboxyl group, the carbon group attached to the R, and carbon double bond to oxygen, and then bonded as well to nitrogen, and then the carbon attached to the alkyl group. Okay, so primary structure describes the specific sequence in which the amino acids are linked together by a peptide bond and a polypeptide chain. No, basically it simply means that they are, no? For example, the peptide of uh, Fry arg as val has a different primary structure from the peptide that is rearranged, no? Yung sequence nila basically magkaiba, but they are all primary structure of proteins. As long as they are sequence, a specific sequence of a peptide bonds, That's the only thing that you have to remember in this primary structure, no? Kapag may specific sequence and peptide bonds or simple peptide bonds, it is called as the primary structure of proteins. It also shows the sequence of nucleotides in DNA or RNA and provides information about genetic input to protein synthesis and cellular potential. Now, if you have seen the chemical structure of a DNA or nucleotide structure of the RNA, you could see that these are basically polypeptide chain, which are primary structure of proteins, no? Kung makikita niyo yung mga polypeptide chain ng mga I mean, anong tawag nito? DNA, di ba? Kapag ang DNA is naka-attach, may tawag dito, nucleotide dito, another nucleotide dito, and then another nucleotide dyan. And then basically it defined the genetic makeup of a certain organism. So all of those structures are classified as the primary structure of proteins. And then the secondary structure is a more complicated, no? Describes the manner in which the amino acids are arranged in a polypeptide chain. This develops through interactions between adjacent amino acids, residues, and polypeptide chain. No? Ito yung create ng double helix structure or alpha helix structure. No? Ito yung first na tinatawag natin na um, secondary structures may create a coiled na helix structure. Ito yun siya, coiled. And then it could be either be extended form or beta sheet. Ito yun siya. So, different subclassifications of secondary protein structures. If you have watched the video that I was referring to earlier, yung tinatawag ko na central dogma and protein synthesis, you will understand what are these lines and you will understand what are these sheets and so on and so forth. Okay? So, I have here an explanation on what is that secondary structure, the alpha helix and the beta sheet. No, basically the oxygen and dotted lines represents into bonds, no, mga peptide bonds yan sila. No? And you could take a closer look on that one in your handout that I have posted in the Google Classroom. Okay. More of the secondary structure. And the tertiary structure is somewhat ang tawag dito, parang walang pattern, non-paternal form sa structural formula nila. Tertiary structures describe the three-dimensional arrangement of the actual conformation of all the atoms and protein molecule. The interactions between a distant amino acid residues of the polypeptide chain leads to the folding of more globular conformation of the polypeptide chain, assuming the three-dimensional shape, for example, the myoglobin. So this is the globular form or the globular formation of a certain tertiary structure protein, no? Kapag may mga attachment between bonds of a certain chain, basically it folds down to a certain specific form. That's why we classify them as tertiary structure proteins. As I've said and have been mentioning earlier, you could have or you could take a look at the protein synthesis and have an understanding on how this um, peptide chains fold and form into tertiary protein structures. Okay. And lastly, the quaternary protein structures. The quaternary structures refers to the spatial organization when two or more polypeptide chains part in a single protein molecule. No? Dalawa na sila na protein structure and then they form or they attach in a single protein molecule. Dalawang polypeptide chain na to siya, no? Represented by the orange or the brown and the gray one. No? Commonly occurring examples are dimers, trimers, tetramers consisting of two or more or four polypeptide chains respectively. So polypeptides are held together by a weak chemical bonds. That's why a simple chemical action could break that bond and basically form into simpler protein structures, which are classified as a simple protein structures or the primary protein structures. So ito yung mga general form of the quaternary structures of proteins. And then the fate of absorbed organic acid, or amino acids, no? Ano yung mangyayari sa amino acids that are being absorbed by the organism? Proteins are absorbed from the intestine mainly as amino acids. The absorbed amino acids are used to the following ways. Sometimes they use to incorporate into metabolic pool mixed into free amino acids originating from various tissues and synthesized into tissue proteins, synthesized into nitrogen-containing tissue constituents such as nucleic acids, hormones, and enzymes. And sometimes they are used for the removal of they are deaminated, which means that the nitrogen has been removed, resulting to the carbon chain and the amino acid group, meaning to say it has been hydrolyzed into simpler forms, no? So with that, madali na siyang i-absorb ng organism through the digestible, yung tawag ng intestinal wall of the organism. The carbon chains are oxidized to produce energy or synthesized into sugars and fats, or again react with amino acids forming amino acids. Amino groups separated from amino acids are excreted to form nitrogen compounds such as urea, ammonia, urine, and excreted to gills and sometimes in their anal vents. No? That's the reason why yung mga amoy ng mga fecal waste. And sometimes when you have not changed the water of your cultured organism, it sometimes may have a fouling smell. It's because of the ammonia or urine that has been removed from the proteins that they have taken up. No, yung mga uh, waste products ng mga fish. Okay, importance of amino acid profiles in fish nutrition. Um, what are what are basically the importance of amino acid profiles in fish nutrition? So, if you take a look at the fish tissues, they contain about 65 to 75% protein on a dry basis or dry weight basis. Dietary protein often constitutes the principal and most expensive item in the fish diets. That's the reason why yung mga fish meal, yung mga Peruvian fish meal are expensive when compared to the plant-based protein source, no? Free amino acids released from proteins by the action of digestive enzymes and absorbed to the intestinal tract used by the various cells to build, repair worn out tissues. So ito yung mangyayari sa mga amino acids that is being absorbed by the organism. And then basically the determination of essential amino acid profiles is helpful to design an amino acid diets used to research studies to determine the amino acid requirement of a fish, no? Yung mga studies that deal with fish nutrition, identifying the amino acid profile or amino acid requirement of a certain organism is being determined by the amino acid or the determination of amino acid profiles of a certain ingredient is being used for your feed formulation. It is also important parameter in the evaluation of protein quality of the feedstuffs. Later on, we will discuss what are the methods in order for the amino acids to be evaluated when it comes to their quality. No? And then nutritive value of dietary protein is dependent to the extent to which the composition of essential amino acid fulfills the requirement of a certain organism. The closer the profile requirement, the higher the nutritive value. So these are some points that you need to familiarize when you deal with comprehensive and more complex manner of identifying the essential amino acids needed for a certain aquaculture organism. Okay, so for now on, since you are still on the undergrad, what you need to focus on is that just the basic experimental research that is that involves the growth performance, the effects of the water to the fish, the behavioral response of the organism when they are exposed to these conditions and when they are fed with this particular diet. So yan lang muna ang focus niya sa ngayon. But you have to understand the principles behind or the theory behind why are they behaving like that, why are they expressing this kind of characteristics and so on and so forth. Okay. And then the qualitative amino acid requirements, the two methods determine whether the amino acid essentials or non-essential. Sometimes they can be identified by the growth response method or the radioisotope method. So the growth response method was used by Halver from 1957, uses a series of amino acid test diets containing crystalline L-amino acids, source of nitrogen. The diets of formulated based amino acid pattern of reference proteins such as the whole chicken egg protein, the chino salmon egg protein, and the chino kyoksa fry protein. So ito yung mga kadalasan na ginagamit ng mga methods to determine whether the amino acid is essential or non-essential. But nowadays, meron na tayong identified essential and non-essential. So these are some more explanations of the growth response method. You could read those and the radioisotope method. The radioisotope method basically used by Coe et al. 1970. Fish are injected intraperitoneally. You know, you could search the word peritoneally, no, dito sa batok banda. um, with the radioactively labeled 14C glucose and fed to the natural diet for 7 days. Fish then killed and homogenized, and the protein was isolated. So that's the way to identify if the amino acid is essential or not. Okay, so yung radioisotope method, and then quantitative amino acid requirements, no? Yung mga tinatawag natin na amino acid requirements, the quantitative amino acid requirements of fish is determined using either purified or semi-purified diets. Purified diet is made up of pure substances, no? Yung mga pure substances, while the semi-purified diets may contain other substances such as fish meal, soybean meal, and the ordinary feed ingredients that we normally integrate in our feed formulation. Whereas yung mga purified are basically synthetic or laboratory produced materials, yung mga purified. The test diets is formulated through the amino acid profile is identical to that of the reference protein, usually fish muscle protein. Now, there are different ways to identify the quantitative amino acid yung using Excel software. I mean Excel yeah, Microsoft Office Excel or Microsoft Office Excel, yeah. Now you can using that Excel, you could derive a growth response, no, of a certain organism. Um itong mga yan are basically the amino acid profile of this is the growth response of the tiger shrimp. Basically defines the amino acid profile or the amino acid level of a certain organism, no? Para ma-identify mo kung ilang amino acid ba ang kailangan of a certain organism when they are fed with this particular diet. Okay? So, itong mga yan are itong sa it would be better if we will have a hands-on this one. No? Perhaps we will find some common time on how to deal with the growth response using this broken line analysis or ano yung ibang tawag na ginagamitan ng Excel when you calculate for certain amino acid requirements or protein requirements. Okay. And here we have the requirements of some fishes and shrimps for essential amino acids. Now, these are basically the most common commercially produced organisms in aquaculture in the Philippines. So we have here the eel, the carp, rainbow trout, chinook salmon, milkfish, Nile tilapia, sea bass, and tiger shrimp. Each of these organisms have the specific requirements as to the amino acids. These are basically the essential amino acids that are needed by the corresponding fish or aquaculture fishes. No, you can take a look at this, and you will have this as a reference when you deal with experimental aquaculture, experimental nutrition aquaculture studies. And then deficiencies and excesses of amino acids, as mentioned earlier, there will be consequences or there will be problems encountered if there are deficiencies or imbalance or excess of amino acids. No, kapag hindi tugma yung mga amino acid level of a certain organisms with regards to the requirement, of course, there will be a deficiency, imbalance, or poor performance when it comes to their growth, reproduction, etc., etc. So just take a quick look on that one because we will have a we are now on 50 minutes of our time already. And then in practical diet, okay, so more about the deficiencies and excesses of amino acids. And I'm just gonna show you this one, no, the PER and the NPU and the biological value, how to get the protein efficiency ratio. So just use this formula, the live weight gain in grams divided by the amount of protein fed in grams as well. So you get the protein efficiency ratio. I could show you more of the important formulas used for fish nutrition, yung mga simple equations like uh, feeding rate, yung mga weight gain, survival rate, and so on and so forth. So these are basically the essential factors or essential formulas needed for fish nutrition studies and the protein requirements of a certain organism. So optimal protein requirement is the level of high quality dietary protein needed for maximum growth. To determine the protein requirement of a fish species, feeding trials have to be conducted using test diets containing great levels of protein from sources of high biological value. Growth response, usually weight gain, is measured for each diet. So, as mentioned earlier, um, you could not have um, ultimate or absolute result from your study when you do not have a definite um, formula to be used to analyze those responses of your experimental organisms. Okay. And then here we have some more optimal dietary protein levels of the some aquaculture species. No, species like the common carp protein sources are fish meal, casein. No, optimal protein level is about 31 to 38. So when you deal with the organisms or when you deal with aquaculture organisms, say for example you're experimenting tilapia. So where's the tilapia here? Nile tilapia, sources of proteins usually are fish meal, casein, and fish meal. And the protein optimal level is 30, no? 30 yung crude protein niya from this reference. When you deal with the white shrimp, ito naman yung level niya. Okay? So, iba-iba yung mga optimal level for a certain specific organism. Okay? Yeah. So, when you deal with abalone, it will have a 27 protein level. And the sources of these proteins are soybean meal, rice bran, fish meal, and squid meal. Okay. So, protein requirement of a certain organism or biological of a high biological value such as the whole egg protein, casein, combination of casein and gelatin, and fish meal are often used to determine protein requirements. No, when you deal with the identification of protein requirements of a certain organism, you have to use the high biological value protein sources. No, and then several factors influence the protein requirements for maximum fish growth or It basically varies from species to species. It also sometimes varies according to the fish size or age, the water temperature present in the culture environment, the protein quality, dietary level of the protein energy, and the daily food allowance being provided to the test organism. The smaller or the younger the fish, the higher the protein requirement is. And then the fish fed at feeding rates below the satiation will have a higher protein requirement. And fish also respond to a better, higher level of dietary protein when they are fed with poor protein quality. So these are important points that needs to be considered when you deal with the protein requirement studies, especially in fish nutrition aquaculture. All right. So going back to your Google Classroom. So by the way, that is the end of our discussion for the proteins and amino acids. Now, in your Google Classroom, you have there the evaluation, the post test for this chapter. No? You have to define what is protein. Let's open this one. So you have to define what is protein, what is the most important function of a protein, what are proteins, what different classifications of proteins distinguish between simple, conjugated, and derived proteins. No, I have allotted several point allocations there, and why amino acids are called building blocks of protein. So very simple. And then name the essential amino acids required by fish. Differentiate between essential and non-essential amino acids. Describe the fate of the absorbed amino acids, and then some more questions that needs comprehensive answers. No? So please submit all this in an A4 sheet bond paper, or you could, if you do not have an A4 size bond paper, you could submit them using yung mga written na mga ano, written in illegibly written, no? Legibly written rather. Yung maintindihan natin, mabasa natin. And by the way, again, you are also tasked to present or submit a pre-recorded reporting of your specific assigned topics. Now, I have already assigned topics for every one of you, so please have that done. The materials were already posted in the Google Classroom, so you don't have to worry for looking for the materials that you need for your virtual reporting or pre-recorded reporting rather. And also you are tasked to submit your PowerPoint presentation used during the reporting itself. Okay, so if you have questions, you may reach me with our through our group chat. And thank you for staying up to the last part of this video. And um, I see you guys in the next video. Thank you very much.